Scott has been here for over 20 years and in the financial institution for 18 plus years. And he loves to help other people become financially independent. I met Scott maybe 2 weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago.
3 maybe.
Because of Curtis again. I tell you, he needs to be paid for all these, right? And so it was amazing to meet you and got to meet his wife last night. So now is your turn. This is Scott Fairbanks. Can we give him a warm welcome?
All right, so a little bit about me going way back. I grew up in a big family. My dad taught school, so raising 6 kids on a school teacher salary was something where we often heard we can't afford that. We're going to pinch pennies. Both of my parents grew up in families with 9 children, and both of them on dairy farms. How else are you going to feed a crew that size?
Exactly, right?
And have the manpower to run it as they were all growing up. My dad started out teaching music and Pima, Arizona, and then Glasgow, Montana. My dad grew up in Idaho and my mom in Arizona, so we landed right in the middle in central Utah. And childhood was not fun for me. I got bullied pretty much everywhere we lived growing up until about 8th grade. And the summer between my 7th and 8th grade years, I put on about 8 inches of height and 60 pounds of muscle because of the hard physical labor Dad always had us doing. And the kids who would push me around didn't even recognize me when we went back to school that fall. Until one kid who lived just across the street from me that had always kind of picked on me the year before, decided he was going to just give me a shove into the lockers, and he bounced off of me when he pushed me. That ended that with that guy. Unfortunately, I learned to fight, and I learned to fight for the things that were important to me, but I learned to fight just to defend myself as well. It was an old Disney movie that I was watching. I couldn't even tell you the name of it, but these teenage boys and their dad wanted to protect the geese that migrated through their town. And there were some bigger kids in the town that were picking on the teenage sons. Well, the dad was a championship boxer, so he was teaching them some techniques of how to set somebody up to leave an opening so that they could just make their point. And it was only about a week later that somebody confronted me at school and decided that we had to duke it out. These days that can't happen in school. Kids get caught fighting, the police are there. Or there's a campus resource officer right there, putting them both in handcuffs on the spot. Well, in this situation, these kids were sitting behind me on the bleachers, throwing little tiny balls of chewing gum into my hair. And it was one of those days that we got to have time away from classes to go watch the basketball team play, but we still had to go to the last 2 classes of the school day. It just so happened that the girls and the guy that was trying to impress them, throwing gum in my hair, were also in my next class. So across the classroom, they keep heckling me, and I finally said, that's enough. And the guy said, okay, meet me at the top of the stairs. And this school had a huge, almost like an amphitheater, right by the office where they had these big tall steps. So when we had assemblies, everybody just sat on the carpeted steps, and whatever was being presented down below, it was just a built-in amphitheater. And then at lunchtime, the area that was the stage, they'd roll out the lunch tables, and the cafeteria was on one side. And when the guy said, meet me at the top of the stairs, I just thought, I don't want to do this, but if it's the only way to make the point, I guess I have to. So I was there waiting. He came running up the stairs like he was eager to have trouble. And I remembered seeing that movie. And so I put my fists up and I used the combination that this guy was teaching his sons how to box. And that first combination left him open and I split his bottom lip. And when he reached up and saw that he was bleeding, he came flying at me just out of control. And I stepped to the side and kind of swatted at him as he went by. And as soon as he stood up and squared up, I used the same combination again. And this time his nose was bleeding. The vice principal stepped out of the office, name's J.J. Grant.
And he spoke like this.
He had the deepest natural contrabass voice I've heard in my lifetime. And he said, here's what's funny. The kid that I was fighting, his name's Fairbanks, and my last name is Fairbanks. Fairbanks, Fairbanks, get over here. Fairbanks, you go that way. The nurse is waiting for you. Fairbanks, saw the whole thing, go to class. So I didn't even get in trouble for beating the tar out of this kid that he started it anyway. But then there was a trickle-down effect. The guys that were that kid's buddies were always poking at me. always trying to find some way to get back at me. And I wouldn't say it was the beginning, but it was part of a pattern that I've seen repeat throughout my life of feeling like I'm being punished for succeeding. A couple of examples. After high school, I went in the Marine Corps. Part of it was I just couldn't wait to get out of my little hometown. And part of it was, if I'm going to be faced with this kind of adversity throughout my life, I better have some better coping mechanisms. I better learn how to be tough and smart at the same time, and the Marines had that reputation when it came to military. I also had a buddy that had gone from high school right into the Marine Corps, and so my senior year, when he came back from boot camp, he came and talked to me about the music program. I did band all through school, and I play several brass instruments, and he was a bandsman, a phenomenal French horn player. And so I kind of got on that track of, I thought I would do Marine band, and I got done with boot camp and went through specialty school, and it was actually not band that I ended up in. I figured I could do that later after I did all of the general stuff. What I ended up in is a specialty called light armored vehicle. These are 8-wheeled amphibious tanks. They weigh 15 tons, but they float. They actually have 2 propellers on them behind the wheels, and they have little rudders that you can drive them through the water. So I got done with the combat training is another month after boot camp. That's you live in the field for the entire month and have really rough conditions. Got done with all of that and went to military occupation specialty school for light armored vehicles. And during that time, there was a promotion ceremony. All of the highest ranking enlisted personnel in our unit decided they were going to have this promotion ceremony, and they were going to include some long-time traditional hazing that's really just garbage, and it's not allowed anymore. And when it happens, people get in big trouble if they get found out. But what they did is they lined everybody up who was getting promoted, and on the military uniforms, you have really wide lapels, and the rank insignia is 2 push pins that go through the lapel. So everybody who was getting promoted got their new rank insignia put on, and then the person that put the pin on would step forward and slam down on those pins and drive them into the pectoral muscles. And then you could not take your hands from your side until the initiation was over. The rest of the initiation was that you had to walk this gauntlet where they had everybody that was at the rank you're going to or higher lined down the 2 sides of the squad bay. And you would step forward and have one guy across from each shoulder, and they got to punch you. And there were about 30 times that repeated all the way down and all the way back. So I was doing all right. When I was in high school, the way that we marched was what they called Corps style. So we marched with our instrument like this and arms held at shoulder height. So the football players, popular kids, didn't really know what the kind of physical labor I did. I worked for farmers bucking hay all summer. And they'd walk down the hall and think they were going to catch me off guard, and I'd see it coming and just raise my arm just 2 inches off my leg, tighten up those shoulders. And it only happened a couple of times because they learned that they didn't want to have a sprained wrist for the next 3 weeks and have it impair their game, whether it was basketball, football, whatever, because when they hit me, that's what happened. They'd sprain their wrists. I'm walking down through and using that little trick because I had to stay at attention, keep my hands at my sides. And there were 2 guys who were bodybuilders that probably each of them outweighed me by between 60 and 80 pounds, 6'3" or 4. And they had been watching the other guys go, what the heck did I just hit? So when they hit me, they punched with everything they had, and they hated the result. So I still had to get hit by another 10 sets of guys and then turn around and come back. And when I got back to them, instead of just punching me, they did this little move of 1, 2, and the third count, they stepped forward, and both of them hit me with their elbow. Crushed both of my shoulders. I didn't have any broken bones, and I never went to medical to be checked out, but it was 6 years from that incident before I could lean against anything with either shoulder. I had permanent nerve damage in both of my shoulders. And last summer, I had somebody 30 full years from when that incident happened. I had somebody say, why have you not talked to the VA about this incident? So I was getting out of my car at the workforce center to go in and talk to the VA liaison. And I realized it's been 30 years, and I thought, why is this still bothering me so bad? And I went in, talked through all of this stuff. I actually ended up first getting a disability rating because I lost an arch during my time in service. And then I realized there's probably some stuff that I need to process that I haven't effectively processed yet. So as I was thinking about talking here, one of the things that came to mind is that some of the work that we need to do to work through, to find the lessons, maybe even provide some things that are inspirational to other people, is the heavy lifting emotionally. And I went and talked to one counselor after talking with that guy at the VA, and I left that appointment feeling worse than I had before. And I thought, I'm not going back if that's how it's going to be. But my own experience with my faith and with thinking back about things that I needed to finally accept in my own life is really what's been making the difference for me for the last year or so. I went to one of those personal development 3-day seminars with Clemmer called Personal Mastery. And there are a number of things that I've thought back about on that experience. I've had opportunities in my church service to minister to other people where the feeling is so strong of God's love and caring for them as an individual, for that person as an individual son or daughter, and thinking and relating to that in the way that I feel about my own sons and my daughter have really been powerful. And I realized that one of the things that I have struggled with for most of my life is, even though I know beyond faith, I am absolutely certain with what I would refer to as a perfect knowledge that God lives and is my Father, is your Father, that Jesus is his Son, and that in the grand council held before this life, it was like a huge family meeting. And Father said, this is the plan. In order for you to grow any further, to mature spiritually and become spiritual adults, you've got to leave and you got to go have some of your own experiences, but you got to make mistakes. Those mistakes will dirty you and you can't come back because no unclean thing can dwell here. And our big brother stepped forward and said, send me. I will pay the price so that all of them can come home. And then he looked at you, Curtis, Brandy, every one of us. He looked us in the eye and he said, as awful as this will be, as impossible as this would be for anyone else, I will do it. And I will do it for you, for you, for you, Alejandro, and each one of our families, for each one of the entire human family from Adam, even if it was just for that individual.
Right.
I will do it. And so for me, the purpose of sharing some of my stories is never to try and one-up anybody else or to impress anyone, but to hopefully share some things that can be empowering in the lives of other people in terms of their relationship with God and their willingness to come to a point that I have reached many times in the last 10 years or so since that first personal mastery experience, of realizing that as powerful as that experience is, when I testify to someone else of God's love for them, I've got to remember it here as well. I've got to be willing to accept that that love for me is just as real. Curtis knows a couple of my other stories, so I'll kind of wrap up with this, talking just a little bit about mindset. One of my first experiences with creating something spiritually first, until it became so real that it could not be prevented from manifesting itself in this physical world. During my time in boot camp, one of the exercises that they have those training to be Marines go through is something that American Gladiators calls jousting, but it's pugilist sticks that have the big ball on both ends. Well, in the Marines, it's not just some inflatable ball like you see on American Gladiator. These are heavy oak sticks that are about 2 inches thick. There's pads to protect your hands from getting crushed by the other stick, but the balls on both ends are cotton towels wrapped with athletic tape. So when you get hit with one of those things, it hurts. And the impact is, there's a lot of inertia behind it because each end of the stick weighs about 12 pounds. So they throw me in this ring that's got sawdust about 6 inches deep, and the ring's probably 30 feet wide. At the time I was 160 pounds, and that was when I was soaking wet, in full fatigues, and 5'7.5". I wasn't done growing yet. And the guy that was already in the ring probably had been heavily recruited to play tight end for college teams all over the country. 6'6", 245 to 260, somewhere in that range. And when the whistle blew, I tried to defend myself. I tried to be fast and quick and dodge his blows, and I just kept ending up face down in the sawdust. Finally, after about 10 times getting knocked down, the whistle blew, and one of my drill instructors was like, "Fairbanks, get over here." And of course, he had to be tough in front of everybody else. And he took me over where nobody else could hear, and he said, "You just showed more heart than I've ever seen in that ring. Don't stop. You keep that up, because that's what it's going to take for you to deal with, whether you're in a combat situation where it's your life and the lives of your friends and comrades, or someone else who's trying to take you down. And when you're done with your military experience, that lesson will serve you well throughout your life." Those few kind words, they were very sparing with that kind of stuff, made a big difference. So the last week of boot camp, we had to do that exercise again, but instead of a sawdust-filled ring, now we're on a bridge over this really green, nasty moat. And they call it the bridge over troubled water. Well, the winner walks off the bridge dry, and the other one is climbing out of that slimy, mucky, nasty water. And I looked across the bridge and counted where my place was in line and saw the guy I was supposed to square up with, and I thought, I'm dead. He was about my same height, but at first glance, I thought, he's easily got 40 pounds on me. He's probably somebody who could play running back for a championship team and be really hard to tackle. The previous 11 weeks had taught me to throw that thought out of my head, because every time I was presented with a challenge during that 12-week boot camp, I had to tell myself, I can do more than I think I can. And we all have experiences like that where the challenge seems bigger than our capacity. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, Paul tells us that God will not give us challenges greater than we are capable of handling. And every day for 11 weeks, throwing thoughts like that out, reaching on the stage and yanking them off with that shepherd's crook, I kicked it out. And I said, no, I'm going to win. And here's how. And I created the exact scenario of when the whistle blows, I'm going to go like I'm jabbing for his face. And when he raises his stick to block, I'm going to come right through the middle of him. And he's going in the water, not me. And I must have gone through that exact scenario close to 200 times in the half hour I was waiting to step onto that bridge. The whistle blew, and it happened exactly as I had created it. Many times since then, I've used that same concept to create something strong enough emotionally and spiritually that it could not resist becoming reality. Doesn't mean it happens that way all the time, because I don't always remember to use that principle, but it works. That is the same power by which, through faith, God and our Lord Jesus Christ created this earth and worlds without number. Everything is created spiritually first. We see examples of it in the world all around us every day, where an architect puts together a blueprint. The land might not even be bought yet, but that blueprint is the spiritual creation, so to speak. And when the land is bought, the foundation is laid, and everything is built according to that plan. That is what we call manifestation. And so we talk about that in goals all the time, of manifesting a goal, bringing it to its physical reality once we have created it strongly enough that it can't fail to come into existence.
Thank you, Scott, so very, very much. Inspirational.
You said you had a question for me.
I had a question, because I was just going to ask you, because I know that you have 3 girls and a son.
Other way around.
Other way around.
3 boys and
3 boys and a girl. So what did you teach your children to inspire them and to keep them going forward?
The way that I was raised is very different from the way that I tried to raise my own kids. My dad always had extreme unnatural consequences for things that he didn't agree with.
All right.
And I had a friend when I was in my 20s. I served a 2-year mission for my church. And one of my companions in that missionary service had parents that taught parent effectiveness classes. And one day he said, let me see if I understand what I had said something to some others that we worked with. He said, let me see if I understand what you just did there, and let me suggest a different approach. And he said, my parents always used natural consequences. And so I said, okay, so let me use this scenario from growing up. I'd broken a windshield in a car. I was willing to pay to have the glass replaced. But instead of allowing me to work off the windshield, my dad took the engine out of my car and put it in my brother's car. And he had blown his car up by not taking care of it. My car was just a casualty of things that happened as a teenager. So to me, that felt like a really big, unnatural consequence. And he said, so a dad who handled that with natural consequences would have said, okay, you have to ride the bus for the next 2 weeks until you can replace your windshield, and here's how you're going to work it off. Older brother has to take the bus back and forth to his college classes until he can get a different car or replace the motor, instead of, well, we'll just take your motor and give it to him. So I've tried really hard with my own kids to let natural consequences be how they learn their lessons from their choices, rather than manufacturing consequences that really aren't relevant to what's going on. Right. Simply because I've also learned that that's how God deals with us. Right. And I've also learned that if I make an error in judgment, it should be on the side of mercy. So often my kids maybe didn't get as harsh a consequence as the natural consequence would suggest, but God does that with us all the time.
So true. Gives
us blessings that are beyond our earning or our deserving, and often diminishes consequences because of what Christ has done for us, when really we deserve something more severe.
Yes, right? He does. That's love.
It's a long answer, but I hope that's adequate for what you asked.
That also explains God, right? Because that's how he is.
Yeah.
If it was not for his grace or his mercy, I wouldn't be here, because I don't deserve to be here, the things that I have done in my life, but because of his love, his mercy, and his grace.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so very much, and I am so honored to have met you. Yes.